God extended His grace to us. Here's the tragedy, though. Sometimes after we've been found for a while, after we've been a part of God's family for a while, after we've gotten acclimated to all the trappings of religion, after we stopped thinking about ourselves as the younger son who was found, and we've started thinking about ourselves as the older son who's doing everything he's supposed to do, who's dressing right, who's acting right, who's living right, sometimes we start to begrudge the fact that God still offers grace to people who were lost. It almost defies imagination how we make the transition from the younger son who knew that he needed to be found to the older son who gets angry when God finds people who were just like we were not that long ago. How does that happen? How did that happen to the Pharisees? How could they know so much about God but be so far from His heart? How can we do the same thing? How can we think so much of ourselves that we get angry when God extends grace to people that we know need it? Our fellow community members, yes, people who have done wrong, yes, people who have insulted the Father, who have shamed the Father, who have rebelled against the Father, who don't deserve grace, yes, to all of those things. But that was us too. We need to remember three things from this story. We need to remember what our Father is like, first of all. You know how God describes Himself in the book of Exodus? The Lord God, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness. That's who our Father is. If we would be like our Father, then we'd be glad when sinners receive the grace that He extends to them, because that's who He is, and He will not stop being gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness. We need to remember who our Father is. We need to remember what it was like to be lost. We need to think back on our time that we spent off there in the far country. You may not like remembering that time. Maybe you don't have that much to remember. Maybe you were saved at a young age, but maybe you had enough life experience to realize that, you know what, I needed to be found. And God extended His grace to me, and I didn't deserve it. We need to remember what it was like to be lost. We need to remember what it's like to be separated from God, destined for hell, undeserving of His grace. We need to remember that, because all of us were. And we need to intentionally cultivate a sense of compassion for people who are still separated from God right now. We need to be intentional about it. Otherwise, we'll be just like the scribes and Pharisees. When the sinners and tax collectors start coming here, we'll get angry. We'll say, you know what, you don't deserve God's grace. You shouldn't be here. Go somewhere else. Go get cleaned up. Go start living right. Go make amends for the mistakes you've made. Then you can come back and worship with us. Then you can come back and sit in the pew at First Baptist Church. But don't come back until then. That's what we'll become unless we are intentional about cultivating a sense of compassion for people who are still separated from God by their sin. How gracious our God is. How thankful we ought to be for the grace of God that He extended to us while we were still sinners. So where are you this morning? Who are you this morning? Are you the younger son? Are you still out there in the far country, still wasting your inheritance? Still living apart from God? Is that you? You're lost and you need to be found. The Father is extending grace to you. Come home and receive it. Are you the older son? Are you the one who thinks that you've done everything right? Are you the one who thinks, I'm living right, I'm acting right, I'm pleasing to God because of my behavior, I'm earning God's favor, and I don't want to see anybody else come who doesn't deserve it? Is that who you are? Examine yourself. Look inside of yourself. Ask yourself, how do I feel when sinners come into the presence of God in the church? How do I feel about seeing those people who are out there who don't deserve God's grace coming in here? How do I feel about that? Are you the older son? Or are you somewhere in the middle? All of us at one time needed to be found. Some of us still do. If you need to return to the Father this morning, then don't miss the opportunity to do it. I'm going to pray. We're going to have our hymn of invitation. I'll invite you to respond however it is that God's leading.